everyone. We're going to switch gears a little bit, talking about what happens when our lakes might not see enough water and how a drought may or may not be a negative impact on our lakes. Hilary Dugan with UW-Madison's Limnology Department joins us now. Welcome. Good morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes. So what is our current focus on our lakes, I guess? What are you guys focusing on when it comes to the health of our lakes in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so I'm a limnologist, so I study inland waters. I think a lot about water quality. So we're lucky in Wisconsin to have a lot of water, which means I don't really focus a lot on water quantity usually, because there always seems to be enough water in our lakes. But we're going to talk about that today.
Yes.
So I think a lot about water quality. Are the lakes healthy? Do we see a lot of algal blooms? What's going on with nutrients, other pollutants, things like that?
So you just made a great bullet point there, because we do have so much water. While a drought status might not be a good thing for our ag folk, it might not have as much of an impact when it comes to our lakes, correct?
Yeah, so it's interesting to think about sort of floods versus droughts, because they're not synonymous. They're not the opposite of each other. We think of floods as these sort of rapid events. We have, a big rain event, the lake floods. The opposite doesn't really happen during droughts. We sort of see more of a slow decrease in water levels. And when we think about lakes and drought, we often think about reservoirs. Lake Mead's been a good example this year,
yes,
where we see the water level drastically being reduced. And we've never experienced that in Madison, for instance. We have these big lakes. Even during drought years, the water levels stay in a sort of a normal range. And that's because we have sort of a lot of water in the watershed, a lot of groundwater, and that's supplying water over a long time scale.
Now, that being said, sometimes that drought status can still have an impact, right, on the streams and creeks that run off, and just on the ability for that water to mix. Does it still have an impact on the health of the lakes?
Yeah, it does. So if we think about streams and rivers, we're going to see a switch toward more sort of groundwater coming into groundwater being a bigger proportion of the water coming into our streams. The water level might be lower. If a drought lasts long enough, we're actually going to see the groundwater table decrease. What we've experienced in Madison over the last few decades is actually kind of an increase in precipitation overall. So we're seeing our aquifers rebound. So luckily we're not in that situation where we're just sort of seeing this sort of constant decline in groundwater that then has impacts on the surface water. But for lakes and thinking about lake health, we think a lot about how long water stays in a lake before flushing downstream. So if you think about a lake like Lake Mendota in Madison, we think about the residence time. So how long, if a molecule of water comes into the lake, how long does it stay there before going downstream? And on average, Lake Mendota is about 4 years. So it's just crazy to think about.
Right.
Like, it's a big lake, water stays there a while. So if we have long-term droughts, the water just stays there longer, which then has interesting feedbacks for lake water chemistry. You can actually get more nutrient removal through different geochemical processes.
So it can be good then?
It can be good in certain situations.
In certain situations,
yeah.
Yes. Not all the time, but that opportunity, you were talking earlier about if there are any chemicals in the water still there, either through natural property or natural ways to remove it, or man-made ways to remove it, right?
Yeah, especially with certain nutrients that can either be turned in, thinking about nutrient cycling, we might sediment out phosphorus. Nitrogen can actually be turned into nitrogen gas and emitted to the atmosphere. So if we think about detention ponds that are used in urban settings, often the goal is to retain water longer on the landscape so we can get rid of some of those nutrients. And lakes can do the same thing. And so if we have rainy years, the opposite happens, where we have water flushing through more quickly. And so instead of kind of removing some of those nutrients or having those nutrients cycle in different ways, we're kind of just flushing them downstream.
Right. Now, moving forward in the future, talking about the health of our lakes, what are you most concerned about, or what is the conversation happening in your industry right now with our lakes, specifically in southern Wisconsin?
Yeah, in southern Wisconsin, it's nutrients. A lot of that comes from agricultural runoff. We have a lot of cows. We like our cheese. Produces a lot of manure, and so unfortunately, a lot of that some of that manure will run off during rain events. So when we have droughts, we don't see as much of a nutrient load coming into the lakes, which is great. So again, droughts can actually be good for lakes if they're not flushing a lot of these terrestrial pollutants into our rivers and then into our lakes. Although maybe they're just being stored on the landscapes, and then when you do eventually have these big rainstorms, it's just sort of delaying the inevitable. So we think about nutrients. We also think about other types of pollutants, industrial pollutants. PFAS have been in the news a lot lately. And so there's lots of different potential pollutants, and how those then impact aquatic organisms or human health are all very different dependent on the pollutant of interest.
Right, and the whole cycle is a balance. We don't want the big heavy rain events, but we don't want the prolonged droughts either.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the concern for a lot of scientists going forward with climate change, is the unknowns and seeing the extremes of both of those events and how it could impact.
Yeah, climate change is really interesting because we know a lot about what's happening with temperature. It's warming. And Madison and southern Wisconsin, we're seeing more warming in winter months, which is going to have impacts. Our summers haven't necessarily gotten hotter, but they will. And we're very confident in that. Precipitation is more of an unknown. Is it going to get wetter? Is it going to be overall wetter, but most of that rain comes in really big short-term events, which would be a problem for water quality when you have these, high-intensity rain events that really do sort of flush everything off the land. So that's a bit more of an unknown, as we can see from the long-term data that it's getting wetter. We're getting more big rain events. And from 2016 to 2020, we had really wet years. And so we sort of were just projecting this increase in rain, and then last year was a drought year. So all of a sudden, there was no rain.
Right.
And then this year we've been back near average, actually, although it's felt dry overall, and so maybe more of those rain events are coming in sort of these, big events.
The bigger events.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is a conversation that we hope to just continue having and focusing on, because the water quality in Wisconsin, again, it's environmental, it's also economical, and it's something we just enjoy in the state. So thank you so much, Hilary, for joining us this morning. We'll be right back.